So the homework was to write code that resets the ball back to the middle when it goes off the left or right edge of the screen, and after it's been reset to only start moving again after a paddle has moved. The intent here is that you are replicating what Pong does, where one person scores and the ball basically resets to the middle until it's ready to play again. This version of Pong here has the ball bouncing off the left and right sides as well as the top and bottom sides too. So instead what we're going to do is I want to make it so the ball just goes off the edge of the screen. Right now that actually means changing the behavior of the collision, so instead of bouncing it, I actually just am going to reset it back to the middle. So I'm going to look here and see like which one of these things is, this is the if statement that represents the collision with the four sides of the walls. And looking at the code here, I can see that this right here is comparing the Y position of the shape. So that would be the top and bottom of the walls for the collision, and here are the left and right sides. If I just comment this section out so that it doesn't run, I'm just going to confirm my suspicion here, and I'm going to let the ball go past the paddle, and it goes off the edge of the screen, which is correct. So what I like to do is right here, what I'm actually doing is I am reversing the velocity of the ball whenever I have a collision with the edge of the screen. So let me just get rid of all this code here. I'm going to keep these if statements that let it bounce off the left and right sides. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to have the ball go back to the middle. I'm not going to worry about stopping it just yet. I'm just going to have it go back to the middle. So what I consider the middle, let's say, is going to be, where did I put this ball originally? 200, 100. Let's just say that's what the middle is going to be. So I'm just going to reset the position here in both cases on the left and right to put it back to the middle of the screen. And it's going to keep moving. It's not actually going to stop, but it's going to be good enough. And let's make it also and I'm just going to actually put it right smack in the middle by accounting for the radius of the shape. Okay. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to have the ball stop moving, but I only want it to stop moving when I've detected a collision with the sides of the wall. So looking at my code here, and this is code that I've written before, so if your code is not exactly the same, then that's okay. There are more than one ways to do this, but I'm going to show you how to do this with the way that I have it set up right here. So the way that I'm moving my ball here is I have a separate variable that controls the speed of the ball. This is just a variable that indicates how fast I want the ball to move at start. So I have what's called a vector2f, the two-component vector, and it has an x and a y. And the x indicates how fast I want it to move right and left, and the y indicates how fast I want it to move up and down. So I have this variable here that I call velocity, and every frame I'm moving the shape by the velocity here. So moving the shape in x by the x component, moving the shape in y by the y component, and I'm multiplying by delta time to account for differences in computer speed. So because I'm moving this every frame, what I can do is if this thing actually ends up being 0, it won't move at all anytime. So I can just take my velocity here, and when I detect that I actually have a collision with the right and left sides of the screen, I can actually just reset the velocity back to 0. I can reset each component separately like this, or I can also reset the velocity by setting it equal to a zero vector, like so. And both of these things do the same thing. This is done in one line, and I'm going to do it in both this is going to be collision with the left side of the wall, collision with the right side. So In both cases, I'm actually going to reset the position, and I reset my variable, which controls how much I move. And my variable has a value by default, but when I go off the edge of the screen, now I've reset the velocity. It's still trying to move it. That's the key. It actually is calling move right now. However, it's calling move and there's no velocity, so it doesn't move it any units. It moves it 0 units. So it's effectively just standing still. So now what I want to do is I want to get it so that if either player moves their paddle at all, I'm going to change the ball so that it actually starts moving again. So the key here is that I need to detect when I'm actually moving. So here are all my if statements that control whether I've moved the paddle up or down or not. And this is where I want to put my behavior to say, hey, I want to reset the velocity back to some position. I want to give it some value again. So think about this again. So I can't just set the velocity here. I can't just say, oh, as long as you're moving this, as long as I'm pressing up, reset the velocity to be 200, 100. I can't actually just do that, or 200, 150. Because that would mean that every time I hit up, I'm resetting the velocity of the ball back to that position. So I'm going to try to do here. Can't really tell because it's actually already moving downwards in that direction. Let's try this. So see how I can move the ball every time I move it? So I need to not be setting velocity every time I move the paddle, because otherwise it gets to be really hard to win, because I'm basically resetting the ball every time I move. I need to only do this resetting if I've detected that the ball isn't moving anymore, right? So I'm going to show you the first naive way, and then I'm going to clean it up a little bit so that I can make it a little bit more, a little bit better architected. So this velocity here, I only really want to change it if the velocity is already equal to 0. So I can set up an if statement here that says if the velocity.x is equal to 0 and velocity.y is equal to 0, I can do this condition here. So I'm going to set up one of these for my up key, and then I can just copy that for all the others. So now I'm moving my paddle, and it's not moving the ball at all until it's at the center. And now it moves because the ball has already been set to a 0 velocity. So I can set up an if statement to only move that when I detect that the ball is not moving, like so. And I then can go through and do this in each of these if statements here. Just copy and paste all of these. And that'll get me the behavior. So if you move in any direction, if the ball is not moving, it will actually then assign the velocity to the ball. Now this is not really great, because I have the same if statement written 4 times, and I'm setting the velocity in 4 different places, but now at least no matter which direction I move, it'll actually move the paddle. It's a little bit unfair because it also moves it always towards the player, towards the right side, so towards the blue player. So we can change this a little bit to be a little bit better. So for one thing here, we don't have to do an if statement in each one of these things. What we can do is we can have a bool that says whether paddle moved or not. And by default, this paddle moved behavior can be false. And as soon as I move the paddle, I can set this thing to true again. And then instead, I can set this variable in each of these if statements. And now I'm going to delete all these that I put inside. I'm going to basically deduplicate all my code. And now I have a variable that controls whether a paddle's been moved or not. And I can do this behavior, but only if a paddle's been moved. I basically have everything here going through the same line of code. Okay. It's the same behavior, only now I can change what happens here. I can change the direction that it goes. And I didn't specify that it had to go one direction or another, but the regular game of Pong is that the person that scored, he doesn't get to move the ball. It's the other person that gets to move the ball. It's basically the person that didn't get the point. Whenever his paddle moves, that's when the ball moves. Okay, so all that stuff is connected here. There is another way you could do this. It's a little bit more. It's a little bit more code, but like it actually is a little bit more explicit about when you should move the ball or not. Right now, I'm moving the ball when the velocity is 0, but it gets a little weird if I do want. Maybe I want the ball to move a little bit when it resets back to the middle for whatever reason. Then my code doesn't work anymore. My code doesn't actually reset the ball properly. So what I can do is make another variable if I wanted to. So the ball's moving right now, kind of in a direction. And my code to reset the ball's velocity isn't working because my velocity isn't 0 anymore. I can change this behavior so that I can keep track of whether the ball is considered to be stopped or not. So I can have a variable outside my loop that says ball stopped. And then, in addition to setting the velocity to 0 here, I can say the ball has been stopped as well. The reason being is that now I can use that variable. Instead of checking the velocity, I can check the variable here. So now this if statement is a little bit more like human readable. This if statement says if a paddle has been moved and the ball is currently stopped, then set the velocity, which is a little bit easier to see than this, where you're checking the velocity of the ball directly. So this is another way you can do that, that behavior. If you wanted the paddle to move in a specific direction based on who pressed the key, one little thing you can do is instead of using a bool here for paddle moved, you can use an index, an integer, and you can use what's called a sentinel value. So a sentinel value is basically a value that you assign a special connotation to. So -1 is going to be my special connotation that says, hey, no player has moved. And this number here is going to represent the value of the player who moved last. So in this case here, I'm going to treat player 1 as index 0. So if if this is up and down as player 2. And then instead of having a bool be set, I'm just going to give a value of 0 and 1 to the player move index. The reason is that if the player move index is greater than or equal to 0 and the ball is stopped, now I can actually use this player move index to control the direction of the ball. If this is 0, meaning that the left player moved first, then move the ball to the right. Otherwise, what I can do is I can actually have the ball move to the left. So this number here is just an integer. It just is 0 or 1, or it can be -1 if neither player has moved. In the case that it's not -1, I now have this condition that says, hey, if it's greater than or equal to 0 and it was 0, which means that the left player moved, then move the ball to the right. The reason being is that now, depending on who moves first after the ball has been reset, that's the direction the ball goes. So right player moved, the ball went to the left. Left player moved, the ball goes to the right. Okay. Aha. One other thing too, there's a bug here. Once the ball has been stopped, and I have the ball moving again, I have to remember to reset this to false. Otherwise, it'll continually move the ball again. So the reason why I did all that stuff, the reason why I'm showing you guys that is because there's always a different way to kind of get that same behavior. There's not like any one perfect way to like solve the problem. However, I think that's part of like what game development is all about, like trying to figure out like different ways to solve a problem, because there's always usually it's a matter of like, hey, I want this specific behavior, how do I get that behavior? Well, you know, it's kind of up to your creativity to figure that out. All right, so let me put this up on Zool so you guys can get it. Any questions on that? I know I went through several solutions, but I can go over any other questions that you might have or any different ways that you might want me to show you how to do it. All right. Thanks, Paul. So let's get into the lecture. Let me stop this recording here.